And coming up on today's show, do we need a directing mind for our railways? The Labour Party seems to think so, and so does Green Signals, but the DfT and Network Rail don't seem so sure. Could we see Pendolino tilting trains, built to run at 140 miles an hour, travelling at 155 miles an hour on HS2 tracks? One of our most senior railway leaders thinks we could. And sweet and sour news from the heritage sector. In the week, we hear in detail why Tornado, a steam locomotive completed only in 2008, has just cost £1 million to overhaul, or near enough. We also learn that a well-known heritage railway, the Nene Valley Railway, could well be on the brink. Hello and welcome to Green Signals, your railway podcast from me, Nigel Harris, and
me, Richard Bowker.
Here as ever to blather about trains for your delight and delectation. Some really fantastic feedback from last week's show, including a bit that stings, but we'll come to that later. Here are just two examples. Steve Athers on YouTube, bless his heart, said, "Afternoon, guys. What a cracking podcast again, with, as always, great humour between you both and great topics." Thanks, Steve. You've just summed up what we try to do. And Seb Barrow sent us a lovely email saying, "Thank you very much for your excellent ongoing podcast series. I listen to a broad range of podcasts on topics such as politics, news, history and science, and I must say that Green Signals is one of, if not the best one." Well, thanks, Seb. That's praise indeed, and it's humbling for us to hear it. We'll aim to even improve on that standard. So thanks for all your comments. They're all very much appreciated. Well, nearly all.
Indeed. I was just going to say, I should just sit back and enjoy this.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Go on, get on with it.
So one comment that made me smile was this one from Robert Spears. And let's face it, I do need to get my own back from time to time, eh? Who, when answering the quiz question on email, referenced the West Highland line, which I think he lives very, very nearby, and said, "Speaking of the West Highland line, please tell Nigel to improve his pronunciation of Maleg."
Okay, I'm not quite sure what I did wrong. Did I put the emphasis on the first or the second or both syllables?
I think you might have said Maleg, and I believe it is Maleg.
Maleg.
But Robert, I mean, I might have got that wrong, but I mean, Nigel clearly did. But yeah. But do let us know if that's now right. I think.
Yeah, Robert, drop us a quick email so we know for future reference. I don't want to test your patience and keep getting it wrong. I'm not into making serial mistakes if I can possibly help it. Excellent. So there's stacks to get through this week, so let's dive right in. We'll start with the recent appearance of Andrew Haines, Chief Executive of Network Rail, at the Public Accounts Committee on April the 29th, 2024. And that is a really important meeting. Now, this took place a month ago, and we've not covered it till now, but with a general election now called and Labour's policy perhaps about to become the policy, we thought it was timely. In that hearing, the following exchange took place, and bear with me, it's important. Ian Stewart, the chair of the Transport Select Committee, who was in attendance at the PAC because of the subject of the hearing was rail reform, the rail transformation programme, asked the following question. "I have one last question. The commentary around GBR is that it should be a guiding mind and not that the head of GBR is, if I can channel my childhood reading, the Fat Controller out of Thomas the Tank Engine, controlling every last aspect. Others are actually saying that no, it needs to be more of a directing mind to sort out the problems that are in the system. Between a guiding mind and a directing mind, what is the balance?" Now, in response, Andrew Haines said the following, and it's a fairly chunky quote, and I'm going to read it all because it's very important. So here we go. "Those who argue very strongly for a directing mind forget that we are in an increasingly devolved kingdom. The people of Scotland, the people of Wales, the people of London, and the powers of the mayor in Manchester and the West Midlands, with others increasingly gaining mayoral powers. The idea of a central directing mind telling all those people what sort of rail service they can have just would be wrong and would not be acceptable. There are times when the network can only work if someone takes a decision, and sometimes we see a failure in the system because nobody is able to make that decision. There are very rare occasions when there will be a need for that sense of somebody having to make a network trade-off, but that should be absolutely the exception and not the rule. Those people who talk about a directing mind typically tend to be quite introspective about the railway and do not look at the railway's users or the railway's political stakeholders who will want a significant say in how the railway performs and the outcomes of the system. So, Richard, what do you make of that? Are you ignoring the people of Wales and are you introspective? Because we both think pretty similarly about this, don't we?
We do. So what he's saying is that if you believe in this directing mind, then you are input focused, you are production focused, not stakeholder focused or customer focused. Let's set the scene. So at this Public Accounts Committee, which they are quite interesting affairs, and I use that interesting guidedly, there were 3 senior Department of Transport officials. So there's Bernadette Kelly, who's the permanent secretary. There was Conrad Bailey, who, let me make sure I've got his title right, is the Director General, Rail Strategy and Services Group. And there was Anit Chandarana, who is the Interim Director General of the Rail Infrastructure team. And in addition to those 3, there was Andrew Haines, Chief Executive of Network Rail, and of course, of the Great British Railways transition team.
Who was pretty much surrounded by DFT there, by the sound of it.
He was certainly outnumbered. He was actually on the end, poor bloke. But yeah, I know what you mean. He was 3-1, right? But nonetheless, that would have absolutely driven me bonkers. And it kind of shows the sort of slightly suffocating, controlling world of the department. Secondly, I defy anyone who cares about the railway and has even an ounce of knowledge or understanding about how it works to listen to that entire hearing, not just this piece, the entire hearing, and either fall into a catatonic state or end up screaming and shouting at the telly. You have to watch it, but you'll get my drift.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. So my reaction, Nigel, I really genuinely understand, I think we both do, why Andrew was constrained at that hearing. But I also wish he hadn't said what he said, right? I would have dodged it a bit. I think there's a time to dodge, right? When you don't want to say what you really believe, and it's appropriate to do that. I think I would have said, there are times to guide and there are times to direct. And leave it up to, leave it hanging as to which was which. But instead, we got this stuff about devolution, mayoral powers. We know full well that there are devolved nations. We know equally full well that there are mayors with powers and visions and political mandates, okay? But I've never suggested, and I know you haven't, I've never suggested that a centralised railway tells devolved nations or regional local authorities what rail service they can have. Right? When we talk about a directing mind, we're not being ignorant of the rail politic of the railways in 2024.
Or even introspective.
Well, certainly not introspective. I mean, when we talk about directing mind, what we're talking about first and foremost is performance and delivery. Day-to-day delivery of a safe, boring, predictable, reliable railway. That's what does need directing. Because today, and I'm talking about like May 2024, there are pockets of great things going on, and there are some people working really, really hard, and good people. But overall, the customer experience, and they're, by the way, we're focused on the customer here, is crap. It's generally quite crap. So someone needs to get a grip of that. And I can promise everybody that if the railway does, the politicians will be broadly happy. They might well take the credit for it or try to, because that's a first world problem. That's what they do. Yeah.
Did you see, incidentally, just to interrupt for 1 second, the editorial in The Guardian yesterday about this very thing, about the dire state of our railways?
Yeah.
And it all chimes in with all this sort of stuff. All that you're saying would answer exactly what The Guardian was expressing some very serious concerns about.
Yes, I mean, I did read that, and it's excoriating, isn't it? Really, I mean, I don't mean this in a condescending way. I mean, it's The Guardian. I simply mean by saying that it starts from a particular political perspective, right? So it's unlikely to go, oh, marvelous, But yeah, there was some great stuff in there. But even when you move away from day-to-day performance and talk about future service planning or even service planning, of course, local and regional and devolved nation even more so, they can do it themselves, right? But local and regional leaders, of course, they have a stake. But Andrew, as well as we do, that if you ask everybody with a desire to list everything that they want and add it all together in one big list, it will come to more than can be delivered, either for financial reasons or for practical reasons, right?
Everybody cannot have what they want.
It's never worked like that. And that's where your stakeholder management skills come to the fore and where you have to get into a bit of negotiation.
And then somebody has to decide, as you said before, you can have that, and you can clear off.
Yeah. And where I agree with Andrew is that the number of occasions when you'll need to do that is relatively limited. But if anybody out there thinks that the West Coast route modernisation timetable got sorted, and it did get sorted in 2002, 2003, by anything other than sitting with everyone and going, you cannot have what you all want, this is what we're going to do, I can assure you, you're mistaken. That is exactly what happened. And Virgin West Coast Services ended up going first on the graph, as they should do for intercity services and so on and so forth. So, that's what we mean by directing mind, day-to-day grip on performance. And I have to say, the more I hear, I see what's going on every day, the more I think we're convinced of the need for that. But we've got to get a grip, and that's what it means.
In fairness to Andrew, he was in a difficult position. We've said he was, he had 3 sets of DfT senior eyes drilling into him as he spoke. So he was clearly the audience he was speaking to most directly with those 3. And I guess in the position he is, he has to take a certain viewpoint.
I agree with that, Nigel, but that's why
there's some realpolitik here.
Yeah, I fully accept that, but that's at that point you give the Sir Humphrey answer, that you turn it back and you say there are times to direct and there are times to guide. I imagine if somebody from the Labour Party were listening to that, right, given that their policy clearly talks about directing mind, there would have been some raised eyebrows.
I also thought that his last sentence was loaded with meaning when he said, in respect of the railway, do not look at the railway's users or the railway's political stakeholders who will want a significant say in how the railway performs and the outcomes of the system. I think that's fairly clear to me that he was speaking to the 3 around him and he's seeking not to court political trouble.
Possibly, but I think it's a slightly tricky phrase as well. I am concerned, right? I am concerned that in a world where the railway, particularly over the last 10 years, has done a world-class job at debating and, if I may say, dithering and not getting a grip, if we're not careful, we will walk into an even bigger world of that, right? It is very tricky to navigate a stakeholder situation as complex as the railway's in, but ultimately, sometimes somebody has to go, I'm actually just going to run all these trains on time and properly, and we're going to stop talking, or we're going to carry on talking elsewhere whilst we get on and do the job. That has got to be front of mind at all times.
So that's where we are on directing mind. It's our views individually and collectively as green signals, I think, Richard. So we're all in a state of heated agreement, which is a good place to be. So now on to something just as interesting and for many just as vexing, the long-running saga of HS2 and what on earth to do now that Phase 2 has been cancelled, because nobody's really got a plan. Well, actually, they have. Now, we've said a few times on this show it would be helpful if the rail industry could be a bit more proactive sometimes and take a lead rather than having to wait to hear what the DFT have to say.
You having fun with my leg again?
Oh, yeah. Oh, these will run and run. Fair enough. I suppose I deserve it. Well, hear what the DFT have to say every 5 minutes. There we go. Got it out.
Beautifully enunciated.
I thought so. Very BBC. Well, maybe not, but at least you could tell what I was saying. So, hot on the heels of Hitachi doing just that with their brilliant intercity battery EMU trial we covered last week. Now it's the turn of well-known railway leader Chris Gibb to do the same with HS2, and Chris has sorted out some knotty problems in the past, hasn't he, on the Southern and in Scotland, where he clashed with politicians, but isn't that unusual? Not. So we spoke to Chris last week while he was on holiday in Europe to hear all about his plan that, amongst other things, would see the Pendolino tilting trains turbocharged to run at 155 miles an hour, which is 15 miles an hour ahead of their 140 miles an hour maximum design speed as constructed. Intrigued? We definitely were. So here's what Chris had to say.
Delighted to welcome Chris Gibb to the show. Good morning, Chris. I understand you're on holiday somewhere in an undisclosed location, but you're most welcome to the show.
Good morning.
So for those who aren't aware, which I suspect is very, very few, you've had an extraordinary career in the railways, over 40 years. I mean, it would take too long to list everything, but you've been managing director of Cross Country. You were chief operating officer of West Coast Trains. You've been a board member of Network Rail. And you are now, amongst other things, a board member of DOHL, which is the directly operated holdings limited for the DFT. We must make clear that this thing we're about to talk to now is absolutely your own work, not for on behalf of anybody else, and especially not on behalf of the DFT. So I think that's important. But what we are very clear about is you've got the credibility to talk about these sort of things. So I wonder if you could just start by explaining what it is you are proposing as succinctly as possible, because it is complicated. What is it that you are suggesting we do now with HS2?
Well, thank you, Richard. I mean, firstly, to say I have a large contact book, as people would expect from my many years in the railway industry, and I've involved over 100 people in the development of this idea. So it's not all my own thinking, and I've had a huge amount of support and encouragement from across the industry to get to where I am. And I'm really grateful for everybody's contributions to that. So in a nutshell, my plan is to make the best use of what we've got now and what is already on order and being built between now and 2030 for when High Speed 2 opens. I want to be able to provide the same or more seats on all routes, and I want to be able to provide faster journey times on all routes from 2030. And I want to bring High Speed 2 and the West Coast Main Line together in a holistic strategy that provides as much additional capacity as possible for places on the route, but also places off the route like Milton Keynes and Bicester and places like that. So I want one single plan that gets the most out of the opportunity that we have in just a little over 5 years' time.
And that's a really important point, a little over 5 years' time. And we know how long things can take to organise in this sector. So this is a call to action, if almost above all else. There's a lot of detail in this, and we'll chat about a couple of things in a minute. But you don't have a new line, for instance, north of Handsacre Junction, which is obviously well known. There could be one, but you can still run this plan without one. What suffers then compared to HS2 in this plan? Because you can't have everything that HS2 would have delivered. So what do we not get?
Well, in order to provide more seats or the same number of seats as today, we need to run a mixture of Pendolinos and High Speed 2 trains on the high speed line. And that means a compromise of maximum speeds. So we need to raise the speed of the Pendolinos a bit beyond where they currently operate at 125. They were originally built to operate at 140. We need to wind that up to about 155 if we possibly can. And we need to reduce the operating speed of the High Speed 2 trains down to 186 miles an hour, the common speed across Europe. By doing that, I believe we can run 11 trains an hour on high speed too. And with the mixture of rolling stock, we can provide the same or more seats to every destination and quicker journey times just using the high speed 2 infrastructure that is being built now between Old Oak Common, Birmingham and Handsacre Junction in Staffordshire.
So just to be clear, Chris, your plan could be instituted on the day High Speed 2 opens using the existing West Coast Main Line infrastructure, because that seems a bit counterintuitive to me.
Well, I believe it can be, yes, and we need to do something on the first day. And as far as I know, there are no published plans as to what we will do on the first day. But if you take the high-speed trains off the West Coast Main Line and move them on to High Speed 2, which is what I'm proposing, that will provide some capacity at places like Milton Keynes. It'll provide passenger capacity at places like Bicester, High Wycombe, places like that. And we can make more out of this investment than simply building a high-speed line from Old Oak Common to the Midlands.
I don't want to be sort of negative for a second, but there has to be a loser somewhere in this, because presumably everything from Liverpool and Manchester is getting to Handsacre, and presumably from Scotland as well. It gets to Handsacre, it pings down to on HS2. But without additional capacity in the Trent Valley, what can we not have? Presumably we can't have an increase in frequency, and presumably freight doesn't get anything more either.
Yeah, there's a 2-track section between College and Stafford through Shugborough Tunnel that becomes the bottleneck. And if we don't build a new line from Handsacre towards Crewe, then that becomes the bottleneck, and we can't cope with more services on that section of railway. And that means no more passenger services on that corridor, but critically, it means no more freight. And one of the objectives of High Speed 2 is to accommodate more freight on the West Coast Main Line, which is Europe's busiest mixed traffic railway. So I would dearly like to see more freight capacity on that corridor, and we won't be able to do that without building more capacity up the Trent Valley.
Okay. Let's drop to the other end. Let's go right to the south for a second. So at the moment, we know we're going to end at Old Oak Common for now, but you say in your plan that Old Oak Common can handle sort of between 8 and 11 trains per hour. And then you also talk about at Euston significantly paring back what's required at Euston. 2 questions, really, and they're connected. If we do that, are we not massively constraining the future capacity of Euston? So if they build that now like that, does that not limit what you can do in the future, particularly with services to Manchester if they ever get Northern Powerhouse Rail sorted? And second, surely Old Oak, I've never heard anybody say that Old Oak can accommodate anything more than 8 trains per hour reliably. So I'm concerned that the south end of this isn't quite hanging together.
Okay, let's deal with Old Oak Common first. The 6-platform station with a double crossover at the north end, which was never intended to be used for regular services. And the station isn't designed as a terminal station. So 6 platforms, all of them 400-metre platforms. I'm challenging the industry to run up to 11 trains an hour out of that station as a terminating station. Can that be done? Well, we've got some new tools in the box. We've got ETCS for approaching the station and the operation of the station. We've got a new set of high-speed crossovers at Old Oak Common to access the platforms. We've got 6 400-metre platforms. Some stations do operate to that level of capacity. Let's not forget the southern region. Charing Cross operates with 20 trains an hour out of 6 platforms. Yes, onto a 4-track railway. If you take the 4 platforms at St Pancras on the East Midlands Railway network, they're coping with 7 or 8 trains an hour out of just 4 platforms. So I think if you brought a team of people from London Bridge and Victoria over to Old Oak Common, you could figure out a way of making this happen. And that's my challenge to the industry. Different people I've spoken to have come up with different obstacles to 11 trains an hour. The switches at the north end of the station, the passenger flow handling, boarding and alighting, all of these sort of things. But if you think of it, 6 platforms, 11 trains an hour, that's about 25 minutes dwell time in each platform. We should be able to do that as an industry. It's not ideal, but it would be the best compromise with which to start the operation.
Okay.
Now,
Euston,
we're going to be using Old Common whether we like it or not for a while, even if Euston is built as quickly as possible. But turning to Euston, I think we've got to figure out ways of doing this more cost effectively. It's not just the politicians that have told us that what has been proposed is too expensive. It is the man on the street's opinion across most of the UK that High Speed 2 is too expensive, that Euston is too expensive. So we've got to come up with ways of doing this cheaper. What I'm suggesting is that for at least the first 12 years, we could run Euston with 2 400-metre platforms. Depending on how we build the station, we could make provision for other platforms to be extended later. So if you put the crash deck in and build the retail development on top of it, you could extend the platforms into the crash deck at a later date and still take all the retail benefit in the early years of building on top of the crash deck. But crucially, we need 2 400-metre platforms minimum in order to accommodate a 400-metre train service to Birmingham. That triggers a whole stream of benefits. We can channel everybody between the centre of London and the centre of Birmingham and the M42 corridor onto 400-metre trains. And that releases capacity at places like Milton Keynes, Berkhamsted, High Wycombe, Bicester, all of these places where we can provide, as a railway, more capacity into London, which in turn can trigger more housing, more jobs, more economic benefits. So those platforms in Euston really are key, but I think we could start off with just 2 in full-scale use.
Okay. Let's move away from infrastructure then and just talk about rolling stock. I feel a certain personal affinity towards the Class 390s, the Pendolino trains, obviously. And as you rightly say in the plan, they were, and you said earlier, they were designed for 140 miles an hour. They've been overspeed tested at over 150 miles an hour. I think Nigel was even on the train.
I am one of the few people to have travelled on a Pendolino at 155 miles an hour with Roger Ford. Chris Green invited us one 2 o'clock in the morning at a rugby one. It was a magnificent experience.
I think the guy that was with you that day, Tony Mercado, has been on LinkedIn very recently, actually, in support of this as an option. Now, I'm presuming the reason why you need this, Chris, is because with the HS2 new rolling stock, at 200 metres long, they're too short to deliver the seat capacity, but you can't put 2 together because you haven't got the platforms. Hence, you need a 266-metre long train in the form of a Pendolino. I think that's right, isn't it? So how does this actually work? These trains, you're almost between a bit of a rock and a hard place here. They're only 20-odd years old, so all that bogie and traction motor package, and the traction motor package, as you know, is a big, people forget, it's huge percentage of the total cost of the train. So that's a lot of potentially wasted cost. And then we're re-bogeying and re-engineing trains that are in their midlife. I mean, that it's I've never heard this done before. So how practical is this really?
Yeah, in words of one syllable, are they even capable of being reheated to that degree?
I've spoken to quite a number of Alstom engineers in the course of developing this idea, and many of them believe, yes, it is possible to do that. I'm not an engineer. I'm not pretending to be an engineer, but that's my challenge to the engineers. I want to see how you can do that. I don't want to hear 20 reasons why it can't be done. I want to hear 20 things we need to do to make it true, to make it happen. And we know that Pendolinos in Italy run at 155 miles an hour. The technology is there, it exists. We know that the UK Pendolinos are in excellent condition. We know that they can continue for another 20 years with the existing maintenance programme. So I'm talking about investing in these trains to give them a longer life and a faster life while they're doing that. I believe the rolling stock leasing model enables us to do that, because if we can extend the life of the trains, the people that own the trains, Angel Trains, will have a longer income stream, and that will pave the way to them investing to improve the trains. So yes, that's my challenge. I can't prove sitting here and now that this can be done, but I believe we've got some brilliant train engineers. We've got many years of Pendolino experience now. We have actually, let's not forget, built 4 new Pendolinos only 10 years ago in Italy, and a whole load more carriages. So not the whole fleet is not 20 years old. So we've got a lot of expertise here and in Italy that we can use to make this happen. So that's my challenge. If we hadn't have had a can-do attitude 25 years ago, we would never have introduced the Pendolino trains into traffic. Everybody said they would never work and it wouldn't be possible. But there were a whole team of brilliant engineers there, several of whom you've named just now, who made it happen. And I think that spirit is alive and well.
Okay, no, well, that having been around at that time, I would completely agree with that. Presumably, these would still tilt. This is a tilting train at 155.
Well, it wouldn't need to tilt on high speed 2.
No, sure.
High speed 2 will want to. They would tilt when they come off high speed 2. They would need to. The further north you go, the more tilt you do, and the higher speed you operate at. But I'm not advocating that they would tilt at 155 miles an hour. They would tilt on the conventional rail network up to 140 once we have cab signalling, i.e. ETCS, which is being commissioned between Warrington and the Scottish border now.
Yeah, no, sorry, that's a very fair clarification, because you mentioned in your paper that you potentially lose around 17 minutes up to Glasgow, but of course most of that is north of Preston when you're actually relying upon the tilt mechanism, yeah?
There is a significant gain if the trains can continue to tilt. And of course, once ETCS arrives, we can go faster. The only thing holding Pendolinos back from running at 140 mile an hour is the ability of the driver to see the signal and react to the signal. Once we have ETCS, there is no reason why we can't go faster up to 140. And of course, both Pendolino and APT were regularly run up to 140 mile an hour during their commissioning north of Carlisle.
Yeah.
The spirit of Pug 2 breathes again, eh?
Indeed.
Well, I'm not going to mention that. Richard can if he wants. He's got a better memory of it than me.
Well, scars.
Just listening to talk about 140 mile an hour running and ETCS, it just puts you back in those days. Doesn't it?
It does rather. So when you look at this plan, all of it, and this real can do, and you need to do that, and you need to do this, we need to make this work, and even things like Class 807s, the new Hitachi trains that are going into Avanti West Coast. In your plan, they get cascaded elsewhere. Does this plan only really work, bluntly, in a Labour view of a directing mind railway? Because my concern is, if we don't have that, you've got to have the ability to move the chess pieces around the board, or this kind of stuff isn't really going to work.
Well, I think we have a guiding mind in the form of the Department for Transport at the moment. The Department for Transport are working hard to pull together the strands of both High Speed 2 and the West Coast Main Line. And, they've welcomed this plan as part of the debate. And in the absence of any railway industry restructuring, it falls to the DfT to make this happen. So we need to get on. There isn't time to wait for legislation and organisational change. I mean, people blame organisational change as a reason not to do something. I don't see that at all. I think we need to get on with this, and with a whole group of consenting adults, I don't see why we can't do that.
Okay. So final question then really is there a sense that as good as this is, and it is very pragmatic, I mean, the thing that comes out of this is real pragmatism. We've got what we've got to make it work. Is there a risk that the critics of this will say, you're letting the politicians off the hook? What we need is phase 2A at least built. And if you're not careful, you're going to find a solution that's not as good as what we were planning to get, and you'll let them off the hook from delivering what we really, really do need.
Well, nothing I've proposed stops the development of a high-speed network in years to come. I'm not proposing to cancel the order for the trains. I'm not proposing to delay the construction of the trains, which the factories at Derby and Newton Aycliffe and Crewe all depend heavily on. I'm proposing to make full use of the existing train crew workforce on the West Coast Main Line. All of these things, none of that stops us building a high-speed rail network in years to come. But we have to face facts. The money has dried up. The country doesn't believe in high-speed rail right now. We've got to build the bit that we're building now and prove that there is an appetite for high-speed rail travel in this country.
There's a lot to be said for that, Chris. I do admire the thinking. And well done, because I think I'm right in saying that this is the first plan of any kind about what we do with the West Coast and HS2 together when HS2 is finished. So well done on that. Some good thinking gone into it.
Yeah, and I would concur. That we've said many times on green signals, if only the industry would frankly get off its own backside and do something, as opposed to wait to be told what to do. And so this is a perfect example of that. So look, Chris, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for explaining what I know is quite complicated in such a clear way. Really do suggest people go onto our website and download the plan, and you can read it yourself. But thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the holiday, and hopefully we'll be able to speak again soon. Chris Gibb, thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
So, Richard, you know more about the West Coast and Pendolinos. Well, you've forgotten more about all that than I'll ever know. So let's have your take.
As you said in the introduction to that piece, isn't it? It is great that someone's gone, we've got to stop dithering.
Got off their arse, basically.
It's 5 years. We've got to design a timetable. And it's a different one to the one that had been planned because of certain factors. Although in one sense, I suppose it's not, because phase 2 wouldn't have been open until quite a lot later as well. But nonetheless, look, what Chris has done is he said, we've got to do something, right? And we've got to... phase 2 is not happening in the way we thought it was, so we've got to do something.
And how will we make what we have work?
There's a lot of complexity in that. The Pendolinos, it's quite unusual to take a train that is still effectively midlife, and bearing in mind the traction package, the motors, and if you like, and the bogies together are a very significant chunk of the cost of a new train. Certainly that new train, right?
What sort of chunk in round terms, Rich?
Yeah, well, I think back in 98 when we bought them, when we finalised the contract, the traction package and the bogies would have been a good third, probably 40% of the cost of the train.
Oh, wow, that much, right.
So it's a bit. So I'm sort of dipping into the the depths of my mind, right, which is a weird place at the best of times. I think that's about right. So what he's proposing is a big old number, but look, it's a start. It's a debate, but what it can't be is a debate that lasts forever and ever.
Only 5 years.
I think this does require a fairly tough GBR to sort it out. It's also not going to be made any easier with all the noise around open access either.
No,
but
eating up capacity.
Well, it is. I don't know if you saw that now Virgin have put in their formal application. They made a statement about it last week. Josh Bayliss, who's the CEO, said it talked about only it was how marvellous Virgin Trains had been, which I personally agree with. I thought they did a great job. But then talks about what open access does and doesn't do. and says that it doesn't require any state subsidy. It says under this type of license, Virgin would not receive any state subsidy and assumes the risk of running a rail service itself. No, not with the abstraction of revenues that are going to happen with the sort of services they're planning.
The all-cats raid it would involve.
Yeah, but also one of the reasons why if there are any paths available, it's because Avanti aren't running them, and Avanti need to start running them and get their act together. I've never believed you fix problem A by creating problem B,
especially when problem B is very complex.
That all needs to go in the mix for whatever comes out of Chris's plan. So look, it's really complicated, but what he's proposed is very interesting, and thank goodness that somebody's got the debate going. That's great.
HS2 opens in 5 years or so. Is it just going to be a glorified, metro on steroids between Birmingham and London, or how is it going to interface with the rest of the network? And he's really given that some thought.
Well,
I was not entirely convinced about I'm not an engineer, but it just didn't feel right or possible that the Pendolinos could be upgraded to that degree. But he says they run at 155 miles an hour in Italy. So
from new. So there's
clearly possible.
Well, yeah, but that is a 25-year-old train. Whichever way you look at it, it's a 25-year-old train.
And that's my reservation.
He's talked to a lot of people. He said in the piece, I've talked to over 100 people. So it's not just him. That's good. But look, it is a start. And he makes the great point that the only thing you can't do is nothing, because you can't have HS2 Phase 1 sat there in splendid isolation. It simply being there at all will affect what we can run and what we do run on the rest of the West Coast Main Line. So the one thing you can't do is nothing.
Shall we, on that cheery note, shall we go on?
I think we should. And we're going to talk about one of your specialist subject areas, which I always defer to you on, because a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned the fairly eye-watering sums being quoted to carry out overhaul and maintenance costs of the steam locomotive Tornado, number 60163. But although it was only built in 2008, it's already become quite a star attraction. And importantly, and I suspect part why they did it, with the general public and not just with
the Flying Scotsman syndrome.
There is, and I've seen it and been on it, and it is when you've driven it. Obviously, it's a marvelous thing. Now, we received loads and loads of comments after we talked about that, with people saying, "Hang on a minute, where's this million got spent on? And surely it's not just on the engine. Surely there's something else." And loads of detailed questions that neither Nigel nor I could answer. So we thought we'd better speak to the boss himself, Steve Davis, MBE, who's chair of the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust. And Nigel caught up with Steve to get the full lowdown on what's been going on.
Steve Davis, chairman of the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust. Thank you for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk to you about what's going on with Tornado. And I suppose in the interest of full disclosure, I am a covenanter to the A1 Trust and have been since 1993, I think. Steve, read the stuff recently and has been following the Tornado story and the overhaul with some interest. But even I looked twice at the last output that said that the cost of the overhaul is likely to be approaching £1 million, not including the ETCS, which we can come to in a little while. And I swallowed hard at that. How was a locomotive which was introduced as recently as 2008 nudged into £1 million heavy general repair bill? Talk me through what's been happening.
Hi, Nigel. Yeah, great to see you again. And thanks for inviting me on. Well, the first point is that the loco's done 135,000 miles since it was built. So it was approaching the LNER BR huge overhaul mark. But what's interesting, I think, is that in the last 10 years or so, the cost of an overhaul of this scale has actually increased. The legislation has moved on. If you want to turn something round quickly, you cannot rely too heavily on volunteers. And so your paid salary bill is significant. And you can't get away from that. And not surprisingly, with an organisation like ours, we don't have the luxury of time because we need to be on the main line earning money. If anything, the motivation was to make sure she was running in great condition and tried and tested, ready for 2025. That was the backstop because she's got to play a major featuring part in Stockton and Darlington 200 in the home of her birth. Secondly, as I say, the thing, although as you rightly point out, she was built only in 2008, we've had to replace all the tyres on the drivers and on the tender. We got some flats in the Bristol area, which took a few turnings off. Now, as to the boiler, of course, went back to Germany for overhaul. And one of the interesting things we've had to do with it is that, and this has come on the redesign of the boilers for the two that we're currently having manufactured, we decided that we would significantly increase the number of flexible stays on the loco, and that comes at a price. Many of this, and this is always the case, isn't it? The stays that tend to break were those that were under the cab. So when you get a stay that breaks, you had to take the cab off. The decision was taken that we would put flexible stays in all of those inaccessible areas so that we don't have the pain of that. And as you're aware, the chance of a flexible stay breaking is significantly lower than that of a rigid stay. It all stacks up, and £1 million, I have to say, not surprisingly, we've scratched our chins and looked at this, and then stepped back and looked at what I thought might be the benchmark price for overhauling a major overhaul of a large Pacific, and £1 million in this day and age, it turns out, is actually not too bad.
The stay problem, was that unexpected that you had all those stay breakages and change the design to fit flexi stays?
The challenge was not the stays, the challenge was getting hold of the welders. And this has been a feature throughout the overhaul. If I come back in another life, I'm going to become a coded welder because
I'd read something that you'd had coded welded issue. Is that was a big problem, was it?
Yeah, it's not been about the quality. I mean, the qualified people are out there, but they're in great demand. And we had a run of bad luck where people we wanted were not available, or ended up with some domestic challenges, which meant they were not available. And when we know what needs doing, and it's damn simple. I mean, that's the great thing about a welded boiler. The replacement of a stay is pretty straightforward. It's not like a screw stay. You've got a very simple steel inner, not copper. It's frustratingly simple, but we've had so many challenges with the availability of coded welders that it'll probably make us rethink the philosophy and the approach to the provision of that kind of support, because it is pretty central. And we know that in traffic, stays will break.
Or would the trust consider employing its own and contracting him or her out?
That's an interesting one. And in the context of our new works at Darlington, which will fundamentally change our approach to major overhauls in the future. I mean, the overhaul could not have been undertaken in our old works at Darlow, but that's a distinct possibility.
You mentioned the new works there, Steve. Richard was fortunate enough to have a guided tour by you. I haven't seen it yet. I'm hoping to pay a visit at some point soon. How you said you couldn't have done it in the old works at Hope, and I understand that. So what part did the new works play? It must have made life much more straightforward and easier and comfortable for your engineers.
Well, the new works played a what I call a supporting role, because the locomotive was taken to LMS at Loughborough, Locomotive Maintenance Services, who did a fantastic job, and a great team of guys there. And our relationship with LMS over the years has resulted in many of the staff there having an almost DNA level understanding of the engine and what makes it tick. So they're not new to it. And,
Good.
And as you know, we all know they're all different, very different. So the LMS dimension allowed the engine to move forward at a good pace. What we couldn't do at the new works at the moment was to actually conduct the major overhaul in that works. We were brand new into it. We weren't set up to deliver it there. But the works at Darlington provided a focal point for the overhaul of small components. And we would have a stockpile of materials. So there was a regular toing and froing between the new works. But the new works will play a much greater role in any future overhaul.
Let's run to the other end of the technology. Talk to me a bit about the ETCS, because Tornado seems to be the test bed for ETCS on the main line, and the cost of that is borne by Network Rail, I understand. So I don't expect you to go into numbers, although feel free if you'd like to.
No, I mean,
but just talk me through the ETCS experience.
Yeah, okay. Well, as you're well aware, if you haven't got ETCS at some future stage, your access to the main line is going to be very limited, and in particular on the East Coast main line out of King's Cross. By virtue of the agreements with Network Rail, operational steam locos which are registered are entitled to be converted. And we chose to be first in the queue. Now, that is also trying to fit a brand new, highly sophisticated electronic system to the engine at the same time as performing the overhaul has been an interesting exercise in managing what could have been potentially two conflicting requirements. And we already had on the loco probably in the region of 3 miles of wiring. My statisticians tell me we've probably got about 6 miles on it now.
Good grief.
ETCS is, I don't want to paraphrase that particular comedian from Berry, but it's the future. You know, without it, we can't operate. But somebody had to be the first, and the development of this system in a steam context and the incorporation of this highly sophisticated electronics into the hostile environment of a steam loco, with all of the challenges that sulfur, coal, water, etc. brings, is an interesting exercise. The power supply to the loco, which was already well provided for, has had to be increased by 50%. So we now have a second steam turbo generator on it, and we have axle-powered generators as well. So there's a lot of juice required with this loco.
So you have 2 steam generators.
We now have 2 steam generators. Have a look at the photos that are going around of the smoke box end, and they're either side the smoke box at the front. And the purring sound from 2 of them is going to be a very interesting exercise.
Is it the sort of exercise you'd like to go through again? Hindsight's
a wonderful thing. I think but as I say, this was a step into the unknown for both parties. Pretty straightforward putting this onto a diesel or electric locomotive, I would hazard a guess, although I'm sure that had its challenges as well. But to put this onto a steam engine, and having seen the difficulty and complexity, all I can say is that I am impressed with the willingness of the industry to go ahead and fit it to steam locomotives. The complexity could have frightened them off, but we are where we are. It's for others to determine its future rollout program. We're just looking forward now to seeing how this thing actually operates on the main line. And it's common knowledge that a short section of the Cambrian is being made available for us to go and test it.
Well, exactly. You put your finger on my biggest concern when you use the word hostile. Fire, water, steam, condensation, acidic substances. They don't tend to mix with electronics. So I'm going to be really interested to see how it all works in practice, as I know you will be too. And I wish you very well with it. Thank you for your time today and shedding a bit of light on how you spend £1 million on an overhaul without really thinking about it, or we're doing a lot of thinking about it, should I say. And, you know, I wish Tornado well. I shall continue as a Covenanter. I look forward to seeing it back in action. And doubtless we'll speak again. But for now, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thanks, Nigel. Take care. Best of luck. Thank you.
You too. So there you have it, Richard. Sort of summing up a bit of what Steve said. Some of it is a bit of obvious, and I should have thought of it really, but they don't do on the A1 a lot of. They don't spin an overhaul out over many years with volunteers going through the work quite slowly. They believe in getting stuck in. That means using contractors, which by its nature is expensive. They'd have the shortages of the coded welders. And I thought Steve's answers to my question was quite careful when I said, so we're going to see the A1 Trust taking on a coded welder and contracting him out for everybody else when he's not working for you. And reading between the lines, it seemed like that's a bit of a possibility. But still, the idea of £1 million on a mainline overhaul is eye-watering. And the salutary comments for that for the future, because even if you do the work yourself, if it's going to take so long, it's got to have an impact, I would think, in the long term on the numbers of locomotives available for the main line. Also bearing in mind, and it's important to nail this one, that cost isn't because of the cost of fitting ETCS, which Tornado is the test bed for.
ETCS, we should say, is the new
European train control
system. It's the new signalling system that you have to have. Yeah.
And it's being fitted on the East Coast main line, and we have a bit of it on the Cambrian at the minute, which is one of the places where Tornado will be tested. But the fact it's a test bed for ETCS is being funded and managed by Network Rail, so that cost is on top. Yeah. And everybody's a bit reticent about how much that is costing, but it's going to be a lot. But again, you know, Steve said, test prototypes always are, and you learn a lot and everything else. Yep. My worry, Steve put into words. I've spent my adult life working around steam engines, and my experience has been that they're a very hostile environment for electronics. Heat, cold, water, weak solutions of sulfuric acid everywhere, massive temperature extremes. It's a real hostile environment. So the whole electronic system will have to be isolated from that environment, which Steve seems confident that they've done. And of course, they've made it work with TPWS, but ETCS is an order above that again. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all that works.
And actually, that takes us neatly onto the other story that was that we picked up, and this one is worrying about the Nene Valley Railway. Now, people will remember we talked about the accounts of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway and the Severn Valley Railway and others recently. This one's pretty dramatic. So, a couple of weeks ago, it was reported that the Nene Valley Railway were in desperate financial straits and needed to raise £300,000 pretty darn quick. And the inference was if they didn't, then it was going to have very serious implications.
Well, I mean, they said in as many words, there is a risk of closure with supporting quotes from the general manager. It does sound dire.
It does. Now, there was a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, if people will pardon the pun, but because there is a tunnel on the Nene Valley Railway. We picked up a story in the BBC News in Peterborough, which is obviously the local area, in which the reporter said a fundraising campaign launched to help save a heritage railway closure, railway from closure, has netted up to 20,000 in just 2 weeks. The Nene Valley Railway, which has been running near Peterborough since the 1970s, is at risk of closure due to unprecedented financial pressures. NVR is campaigning to raise £300,000 to help with the stark financial challenges. Now, far be it from me to do my Cheerful Charlie impression from Clarkson's Farm, but £20,000 in a few weeks when you're trying to raise 300,000 is less than 10%, so that's not good. In fact, that's really not good at all. So that's a real worry. And I'm kind of reminded a bit of my time involved in professional football, where a couple of clubs ended up being fan-owned and did the sort of same thing. And the problem is, you can only really do it once. You can ask your supporters to dip in their pockets once when it's an absolute crisis, and they will usually step up.
You can't,
but they can't keep doing it, right? So the question is, with these guys, what will change? Because if nothing changes, then I would fear that this is, this is kind of kicking the can down the road, but you'll get to the can in the end. So, look, I really, we both wish them well.
We absolutely do.
But this does not feel good.
We do wish them well, because they say they're a smashing bunch of people, very friendly, very committed, and I hope that they pull it off.
Shall we crack on with the quiz?
I've been looking forward to this from my grandstand seat at Mallaig, to hear you with one bound he was free from the big question about. I never bet you thought there were so many blue lights on the railway. One answer which really made me smile was that it was on the police cars of the VTP rushing to an incident.
Yes. Well, let's just remind ourselves what the question was. It was, we're used to seeing red, yellow and green lights on the operational railway, but where might we find blue lights in an operational setting, and what do they signify? Shut up, honestly.
Just about everywhere, I think. I'm going to share something with viewers now. I'm going to go off piece for a moment.
Go on.
When we produce these programs, loyal viewers, we produce a thing called the treatment, which is just the sort of subjects we're going to discuss, and there's odd prompts here and there. And after the quiz, which is number 6, and Richard prepared this treatment, RB onto the quiz, NH, smart arse comment from Nige, smiley face.
Well, you haven't let me down, have you? Right.
I just did as I was told or expected. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go on predicted, I think.
Go on and humiliate yourself.
So, I had in mind when setting that question, I could think of 3 core ones, right? Which were the change of gradient in the Severn Tunnel. So there are blue lights where the gradient changes, so that drivers know to put the power back on because they're now going up.
And no visual reference. I did not know.
There's no visual reference, right? Railway electronic token block, which is the signalling system on the on some of the lines in Scotland, for instance, on the far north West Highland line. Hence the previous comment from Mr. Spears. Have we mentioned Mallaig? I think we might have. And then the third one that I was aware of, and I've got on my list here, was a thing called roll, which is all to do with electrification. And I'll read you the best answer that we actually got on roll. Roll devices, which stands for Reminder of Live Exposed, which reminds staff working on OLE, overhead electrification, overhead line equipment, to check their overhead line permits as they may be approaching their safe working limits or that a residual electrical hazard is present. So roll was, so I knew about those 3. There were some more. There were quite a lot of more.
Some.
Oh, well, actually. So in this quiz, if you said anything to do with the automatic train operation moving on to communication-based control on London Underground, there were various versions of that. Yeah, that was fair.
Is this going to take long?
No, there were quite a few others that we didn't accept. There was quite a lot relating to door lamps on things like postal EMUs. Didn't accept that because I'd sort of set it as it's red, yellow and green. So it was kind of like signal lights rather than that. But we still had, I think, over 50 correct answers. So what we decided to do, feeling very generous, is actually we're going to do 3 mugs this week because there were so many blooming answers. And the winners this week are Tom Braund, Martin Plum and Eric Wallace. So, gentlemen, if you could drop us an email to info@greensignals.org with how to get your mugs to you, we will do just that. Quite an overwhelming response to that one.
I do enjoy the quiz.
You do. Well, this week's question, I am reasonably confident. I'm no longer going to say absolutely confident that there is only one answer to this, but I'm probably about to prove wrong. So here's the question. Where in the UK, actually, no, do you know what? I'm going to change it mid-recording, how's this? Where on Britain's railway would I have seen both narrow gauge and standard gauge wagons on the same train whilst that train was running in service? If you think you know.
I know I don't know.
Saturday, midday, after this show goes out, please, which I think is probably the 1st of June, isn't it? At YouTube or email. People are getting very clever. A lot of people sending it via email, so other people don't see their answer, which I think is quite smart. But anyway, let us know by midday on Saturday, and we'll do the draw next week.
What a great institution, the quiz is. And I'm loving seeing the pictures, by the way, from the winners of them holding the mugs up.
Yes, absolutely.
We shall have to put them together for a screen full of pictures of people.
That'd be great.
Waving the mugs around as a promotional thing for it. Right, okay. Our highlighted piece of good news this week comes in the form of Community Rail Week, which ran from 20th to the 26th of May and showcased some of the truly wonderful work empowering communities to get more from the railways and make them look better too. Community Rail is a grassroots movement of 75 locally led community rail partnerships and 1,300 volunteer groups, now spanning 34% of a third of Britain's rail network and half of Britain's 2,580 stations. A real feather in the cap and legacy for Dr. Paul Salverson, who founded it many years ago, and it's got success written all over it. You did a brilliant job in kicking that off, Paul, and was a guiding mind for quite a long time. Their More Than a Railway campaign, marking Community Rail Week, involved nearly 100 community events and activities nationwide. These wide-ranging initiatives increase access to opportunity, help communities to have a voice on rail, bolster sustainable rail travel and tourism, tackle social isolation, and put railways and stations at the heart of community life. Richard, this is a far cry from the dismal, unloved local railways, not only of our youth, but of not that long ago. I can remember writing news stories for Rail about the Mid Wales line, where local groups were being denied permission to go on stations and weed flower beds and just do a bit of tidying up. So the state we're in now, where you've got all these groups doing wonderful jobs keeping stations tidy and promoting the railways at the same time, I think is really great. And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week, from Mallaig to Blue Lights. We've done our bit, so thanks so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. And more important than anything, do join us again next week when we'll have a very special feature on Richard and Steph's trip to Hitachi up in the northeast there. And it's really good stuff. They had a fantastic time and came away really impressed, I think it's fair to say.
Bowled over. Yeah.
Bowled over and blown away. So there you go. So it's goodbye from me for this week. And
it's goodbye from me.
Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.